Well, here we are on the Sunday after, in the afterglow of Easter, and after the big bash last week. You may be feeling a kind of a hallelujah hangover, and you're sort of wondering, well, what now? What I like to do on the week after Easter is answer the question, so what? What does it really mean in your life and my life that Jesus rose again from the dead? And let me just start with a breathtaking insight into the obvious. Jesus' body will never die again, but someday yours and mine will. My dad used to say, Vic, there are people dying every day that never died before. And then he, with a twinkle in his eye, would say, the way I want to die is get shot by a jealous husband at 103. You had to meet my dad for know that. But despite all of our modern medical marvels, death remains the one impenetrable mystery that we hope happens to us someday, many, 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 many years from now, painlessly and quickly after a long and happy life. But if Jesus stepped out of the grave, then that one piece of data is a huge game changer. I was just reading this past week an author by the name of Sean McDowell, and he said, if Jesus conquered death 2,000 years ago, there are three questions that get answered, questions that people have been asking for as long as they've been people. The first question, does God exist? Well, there's good information and evidence that God exists if Jesus rose from the dead, because nature by itself does not have the resources to be accountable for something like raising dead things back to life, any more than a feather can be a resource accountable for putting a dent in a car, unless you're driving a Hyundai or something. But uh, Jesus rose from the dead. It's likely that there was a supernatural being who intervened on Jesus' behalf. And that's indeed how Jesus interpreted the meaning of his resurrection. So, does God exist? If Jesus rose from the dead, there's very overwhelming evidence that there is a God. The second question that gets answered if Jesus rose from the dead is, which religion is true? Christianity is uniquely true. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a lot to learn from other faiths. For example, from the Muslims, the importance of prayer, from Judaism, the importance and passion for social justice, but there's steps along the way to the ultimate truth of Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, if indeed Jesus rose again from the dead. And then the third question that gets answered if Jesus rose again from the dead, and that is there life after death? That's one of the haunting questions that humans have asked, for as long as there have been human beings. In 1990, there was a science fiction movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I never forget seeing this movie, Flatliners. And it shows these medical students who want to know if there's life after death. And instead of studying religion and philosophy, they decide to flatline each other's hearts in the lab and then resuscitate each other afterwards. And then they report on what they experienced on the other side. And that's really kind of bizarre, but it makes a lot of logical sense. If you want to know what's on the other side, you need to talk to somebody who's been there and come back. Well, if the resurrection happened, that would be Jesus of Nazareth, who said to his disciples, I go to prepare a place for you so that where I am, you may be also. And so someday your heart's going to stop and you're going to keep going. This earth is just the warm up, and eternity is showtime. But on the way to eternity, you and I are going to pass through this experience called death. And I'd like for us to look at one of the most fascinating passages of the scriptures, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. It is a poetic description of the aging process of the human body. If you've not seen this before, you will. It'll blow you away. So here it is, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 1 through 8 and 13. And I'm going to stop it along the way to just interpret some of these lines. Remember the Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. Now, in what season of the year does the light grow dark? In the wintertime. So old age is the winter of life. And it says, and the clouds return after the rain. That's a way of saying that in old age, life is just one problem after another. You have clouds, then you have rain, clouds, rain, clouds, rain. And now the author goes on to talk about his body, verse 3. When the keepers of the house tremble, the keepers of the house, the hands, they get shaky, the hands tremble. And it says, as the strong men stoop, what are your most powerful limbs? Your legs. Your legs begin to stoop in old age. When the grinders cease because they're few, you don't even need me to explain that one, right? Your teeth, your grinders cease because they are few. And those looking through the windows grow dim, the eyes grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed, forgive me for this, but that is a Hebraism for constipation. Uh, it's very earthy, the Bible. Let's hurry on quickly now. And, and the sound of grinding fades. You can't grind out the work like you once did. When men rise up at the sound of birds, elderly people are light sleepers, and the slightest sound can give them insomnia. And here's the irony, though. It says, but all their songs grow faint. Yet there's a loss of hearing. Songs grow faint. When men are afraid of heights, what's the great fear of so many elderly people? They'll fall and break a hip. And dangers in the streets. You ever find yourself on a highway following behind this, older elderly couple, and they're poking along? Don't honk. You're going to be there someday. When the almond tree blossoms, have you ever seen almond trees in full bloom? What color are those blossoms? They are snowy white. And the grasshopper drags himself along, and desire is no longer stirred. Then man goes to his eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. And now come these gripping images of death. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is severed, or the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, or the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to the God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Now skipping to verse 13. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Bottom line, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. What contrasts with the realism of Ecclesiastes 12 is the youth and fitness fantasies of our society today. You go to the supermarket and you see the covers of the magazines and hear all these bionic bodies with these surreal looking people with their pearly white teeth and their washboard abs. And I know exactly who to blame for that. How many of you remember Jack LaLanne? Right. The original fitness guru. Right. And Jack, I'll never forget, in 1976, I once heard a news announcer say, today on his 62nd birthday, Jack LaLanne dove into Long Beach Harbor and swam a mile. And if he had stopped there, I would have said, gee, this guy's in shape. But he continued to say, while pulling 13 boats, one for every one of the 13 colonies, with 76 people on board, while handcuffed and pulling with his teeth. And I thought, what good is a great body if your mind is gone? And this body beautiful thing is sort of taken over. Everywhere you look on infomercials, you have, put 20 pounds of muscle on with our latest thingamajig, or the latest studies have shown that kale makes you immortal. This all simply shows the power and relevance of the scripture. And the book of Ecclesiastes says our obsession with wrinkle-free skin and youth and muscles is part of the sadness of the human body and human life. And even implies that God played a trick on us by, in the words of Ecclesiastes, putting eternity in our hearts, but just a few short years in our bodies. In fact, none of us know how long our ball of yarn is. The end could come in 50 years or 5 years, or even this very afternoon. And the question is, how now should I live? Well, let's look at the opening line of Ecclesiastes. It says this. It says, remember your Creator. Remember. That word remember has to do with where you put your focus. Where is your conscious awareness? And it says, put your conscious awareness on your Creator. Now, very often we have things in our life that are critically important to us that we don't have any conscious awareness of, like gravity. Or just, I was thinking this morning, just think about your windshield of your car. I mean, imagine if you drove here to church today without your windshield. Right now, you'd have bugs all over your face. You'd have yellow pollen in your teeth. You'd have your hair going every which way. But do you ever sit behind the wheel of your car and go, oh, I'm so happy for my beloved windshield. Oh, thank you, windshield. What he's saying is, don't treat God like your windshield. Consciously, moment by moment, be grateful and aware of God's presence in your life. Remember your what? Creator. Now, that's interesting, too, because this is the only place the word creator appears in the book of Ecclesiastes. It could have easily said, remember your God, remember your Lord, remember the Holy One. But why does it say, remember your Creator? You know why? Because when you say you have a Creator, it's also telling you who you are. What are you? You're a creature. You're a created being. And that has implications for how you live. I came across this wonderful parable, and this author says, imagine for a moment you're a baker and you're making a whole big batch of gingerbread people. And so you put all the stuff in the oven and you open up your oven and out come all these gingerbread people. And you look at them and you're admiring your creation and you say, boy, I wish they were alive. Wish they could walk around. And sure enough, you're the creator, right? So you go zap and all of a sudden you have these little gingerbread people and they're running around on your kitchen counter. And you say, I am your creator. And they look up at you and say, whoa, she's big or he's, and they bow down to you and all this sort of thing. And you say, well, I have something to say to you. And as you're saying that, one of the big gingerbread people is beating up on one of the little gingerbread people. And the little guy looks up to you with his raisin eyes, and he goes, oh, help me. And you tell the big one to knock it off and all this sort of thing. You soon discover you have two kinds of gingerbread people. You got one group that resent you and they don't want you to, cramp their style. And they want to be free and they want not to be accountable. And you got this other group over here who look up at you and say, you are my creator. But the problem is that you can't tell which ones are with you and which ones are against you all the time. So you decide to disappear. You think, well, if they can't see me watching them, then I'm going to see their true colors. And so you step behind the refrigerator. And as you're standing there, all of a sudden, sure enough, a rebellion breaks out over here among these. And they say, you see, there's no baker. You can't see any baker. The whole baker thing's a myth. And, it's just there to cramp our style and control us. And we're really free. We don't have to worry about any baker. You get these people over here and they say, now, wait a minute. We can't see the baker, smell him or touch him or anything like that. But look at us. We're here. We're made of dough and we can walk and laugh and make poetry and do all these kinds of things. And no, we believe in the baker and everything I am, I owe to the baker. In other words, when you forget your creator, what happens to you is you go down a path of independence that's the root of all evil. So what the author says is remember that you're somebody's masterpiece. Remember you belong to somebody. There's this thing called the Heidelberg Catechism, and it has a question that says, what is your only comfort in life and in death? And it says, that I am not my own, but that I belong, body and soul, life and in death, to my Savior, Jesus Christ. See, I belong to somebody. And someday this cookie's going to crumble and I'm going to face my baker someday. And so it says in verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is severed, before the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring or the wheel broken at the well. These are all metaphors for dying. It says it's like a pitcher that gets knocked off a table and shatters into 1,000 pieces. It says, remember your creator before that happens to your body. And then he goes on to say, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. The word for spirit in Hebrew means breath of life. Author's saying that the breath of life God breathed in us goes back to the God who breathed us in the very beginning. And then the author writes in verse 8, meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. Paraphrase of that would basically say poof, poof, everything goes poof. And if you try to grab onto something, ultimately it's going to slip through your fingers. So remember your creator while you still have a mind with which to remember him. This morning, you might want to even look up and say, God, I'm sorry, I forgot that you created me. I am your creature. I belong to you. But again, if the resurrection is true, then you and I have eternity to look forward to. And the purpose of life is not just to try to line up as many days as possible on earth, but the purpose of life is to prepare for eternity. Dallas Willard said, we are in training for reigning with God forever. Now, a secularist hears that and says, oh yeah, there it is. Those are Christians. They are so heavenly minded. They're no earthly good. All they care about is pie in the sky by and by. I remember once hearing an African-American pastor say, oh, no. What we say is sound on the ground while we're still around. In other words, believing in the resurrection of the body in no way diminishes the importance of how we live in this world today. In fact, we're the ones who believe that whatever you do for justice and for humankind is indestructible and has eternal significance. But if you believe that your life is just going to go poof like that and it disappears, or this earth is just going to get burned up, why would you want to go around polishing the brass on the Titanic? But if you believe if this world is a redeemed creation that be restored one day by a good and loving and caring God who will not give up his dream of a new heaven, new earth, then there's nothing you can do that will not be saved for all eternity. You can look around at this earth and say, this is my Father's world. And it means that whatever you do in your body, no matter how weak and feeble your body, is going to be preserved in all eternity. Richard Mouw, who was the former president of Fuller Seminary, he talks about one time being at a conference with the great sociologist Peter Berger. And Rich made the mistake of making one of those canned seminary president statements that all Christians should be engaged in radical obedience and working for the reconciliation of the world. He says, Peter Berger responded to me with the observation that I was operating with a rather grandiose notion of radical obedience. Somewhere in a retirement nursing home, he said, there's a Christian woman whose greatest fear in life is that she'll make a fool of herself because she's not be able to control her bladder in the cafeteria line. For this woman, the greatest act of faith in Jesus is to place herself in the hands of a loving God every time she goes off to. In other words, your greatest spiritual victory may be in the tiniest little things you do to fight for God every day of your life. Most people see life as a kind of bell curve that goes up like this, and then it goes down like this. And you go up and you peak at, say, 40 or 50 or 60, and no matter how, depending on how old you are, you push it out further, right? 40, 50, 60, something like that. But the point is you peak at some point, and then you go downhill. And where you peak is where you can no longer accomplish what you did when you were younger. The only way the Bible has that point of view is only right here in the book of Ecclesiastes. But in everywhere else in the Bible, the view of life is it just goes like this all the way into eternity. Now, that doesn't mean the Bible doesn't take seriously the infirmities of old age. It talks about how King David in his old age had such poor circulation that he could not stay warm even in bed under the covers. And so what they did is they gave him a young wife her job was to go into the covers and keep him warm. And then there was an elderly man named Isaac who had such bad eyesight that he couldn't tell one son from the other. But the Bible doesn't dwell on those problems of old age for the simple reason to live to an age where your body does not function properly was the greatest dream of all biblical people. To be a grandparent, to have a life that is full of years, to see your children's children was the dream of biblical people. Today, our dream is to have wrinkle-free skin and look young forever. But in the Bible, for example, the book of Zechariah says his dream is that the whole world would be filled with elderly people. As Zechariah writes, once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with a cane in his hand because of his age. And the reason we don't feel that way is because our society has not answered the question, what is the meaning of growing old? But the Bible says the meaning of growing old is this, that every year you live, God is filling you with more and more wisdom in hopes that someday you're going to discover the true meaning of life, which is not producing or competing or accomplishing, but loving and caring and enjoying God's presence forever. And so if you're a grandparent or a great-grandparent, hey, you're not going downhill, you're going uphill. That's why it's so much work. And you're going like this all the way to glory. But Ecclesiastes is not written for elderly people. Remember how we read at the very beginning. Remember your Creator when? In the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. I remember when I was young and stupid in college, I used to think, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could know exact moment when I was going to die? And I actually had a group of guys in my Bible study in college. We used to think about this a lot. We'd say, boy, wouldn't it be cool if you knew the exact moment you were going to die? And then you would party your brains out until the exact split second before you died, accept Jesus, get under the wire, make it into heaven, and then you have the best of both worlds. That's a trick question. I was young and stupid. Give God your prime time. Give him your best years, and you'll never regret it. You will have joy and you'll have thrills beyond anything you could ever imagine. This is a carpe diem text. It's saying seize the day. It's saying, in light of the brevity of life, don't let a single second slip between your fingers. Take a big bite out of life and let it dribble down your chin. Go out for God. Go pedal to the metal, moment by moment, every single day. In fact, in the previous chapter, chapter 11, verse 1, is an interesting line. It says, cast your bread upon the waters, and after a time it will come back to you. What this is about is Solomon, who was the author of Ecclesiastes, or one of his disciples, wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon was a famous venture capitalist. And what he used to do is he would send his ships out on these expensive and very dangerous ventures. And then he would sit on pins and needles for weeks, waiting to see if his gamble paid off. And then there would come this moment where he'd look out at the horizon, he'd see the masts of his ships coming back, filled with treasure. It says in 1 Kings, gold and silver and ivory, apes and baboons. This is what this is saying, is don't stand around in life with your thumb in your ear. Grab each moment. Live each moment for God. I mean, take all of the chips of your life, shove them into the middle of the table and go all in for Jesus. Jesus said, he who tries to save his life will lose it. And the one who loses his life for my sake and the gospel, the same will find it. There was a missionary by the name of Jim Elliot. He said, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep in order to gain what he cannot lose. Go all out for Christ. Give your life to him. Somebody has said, a wise person learns from your mistakes, but an even wiser person learns from the mistakes of others. And what we got is old King Solomon here looking back over his life saying, don't make my mistake. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Give him your prime time. Give him your best years. Make Jesus your Lord today.